If small investors suffered, they would soon be back for more. They knew the game was rigged, but maybe next time they could beat the system.
If you want the rainbow, you must have the rain.
Wall Street had its critics, among them economist Roger Babson. He questioned the boom and was accused of lack of patriotism, of selling America short.
Roger Babson warned of the speculation, said there's going to be a crash, and the aftermath is going to be quite terrible. And people jumped on Babson from all around for saying such a thing, so that people who were cautious about their personal reputation, who did not want to call down on themselves a lot of calumny, kept quiet.
Mobster Al Capone was not a cautious man. From his Chicago headquarters, he condemned the wild speculation on Wall Street. It's a racket, he said. Those stock market guys are crooked. Capone invested his money in a $100 million bootleg liquor business. Business was good on Valentine's Day, 1929. He had just eliminated the competition. March 4th, Inauguration Day. Republican President Calvin Coolidge had run his administration on the belief that business was the basis of America's prosperity. Government should not interfere. Herbert Hoover had won a landslide victory, promising to carry on the tradition.
This was a time in our history when governments did not, as now, take responsibility for the economy. They presided over it, but the level of economic activity and the level of economic growth and the stability of prices were not yet everyday concerns of the president. And what Coolidge did was to say how wonderful times were, how happy everybody was going to be, and how prosperous everyone was going to be. And Hoover's responsibility was to continue that optimism.
You, Herbert Hoover, do solemnly swear.
Politicians came and went, but in the 20s, the businessman was king. New York City had a dapper, corrupt, and vastly popular mayor, Jimmy Walker. But behind the scenes were powerful financial leaders, like Charles Mitchell.
Jimmy Walker was high, wide, and fancy with the city finances. One day, Father called Mayor Walker up here, and he had some other bankers with him, and Mayor Walker was sort of put on the grill in the upstairs library while these bankers read the Riot Act to him to try and get some fiscal responsibility instilled into him. And I know that after the meeting, someone took me into the library and pointed me out the chair that the mayor had been sitting in, and he'd been so nervous. Oh, those Louis XIV chairs with all the little Louis XV chairs with all the little tacks in there, yes, brass tacks. And he'd pulled out almost all the brass tacks that were sitting on the floor out of sheer nerves.
The stock market, too, was getting a severe case of nerves. On Friday, March 22nd, all eyes were on that august government body in Washington, the Federal Reserve Board. The board distrusted the boom. They saw the speculation as reckless and dangerous because it was based more and more on the shaky foundation of borrowed money, margin. The board had the power to curb the borrowing, but the market was now dependent on borrowed money. Without margin, it would collapse. The board met day after day. Would they ask for regulation of the stock market? They issued no public statements. Their silence was terrifying.
Get my broker, say get my broker. Got the dealers, got the dealers, got the dealers.
On Monday, March 25th, investors began to sell. Blue chip stocks plunged. Tuesday, another wave of selling swept the market. As it fell, people holding stock on margin were hit hard. They'd put only 10% down, but the value of their stock dropped more than 10%, so their down payment was gone. To hold their stocks, they'd have to put up more money. On March 26th, millions of investors suddenly found themselves in deep trouble.
Your broker would call you and say, we need more money. You're wiped out. Unless you could give them more money, he would then sell the stock. Now, he would sell the stock, which would cause the stock to go down to 83, 85, 86. And now more margin calls are triggered. So one margin call triggers, another margin call triggers, another margin call, and it goes all the way down.
With everyone trying to borrow money to cover the falling value of their stocks, there was a credit crunch. Interest rates soared. At 20%, few people could afford to borrow more money. The boom was about to collapse like a house of cards. Charlie Mitchell was horrified. His success, his entire career, his personal fortune had been based on a rising market. If nobody else was going to stop the crash, Charles Mitchell would.
Father, at that point, stepped in and announced that the National City Bank would provide $25 million of credit, which was all very well and very necessary, but he added the fateful words, whatever the Federal Reserve Board thinks. And Senator Carter Glass, who had been sort of the father of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, took that as a direct slap across the face. But whatever Senator Glass thought, immediately the credit crisis was alleviated. In fact, within the next 24 hours, call money went from 20% to 8%, and that stopped the panic then in March.
The next day, the market rallied. The Federal Reserve Board remained silent, tacitly accepting defeat. The hero of the day was Charlie Mitchell. He had single-handedly stopped the crash of '29. With the start of the baseball season, people quickly forgot the break in the market. New events filled the papers. There was a crisis in Nicaragua, where the nationalist hero Augusto Sandino was threatening American Marines. Tragedy in the British Mandate of Palestine, as Jews and Arabs clashed over control of these sites in Jerusalem. And in Antarctica, Commander Byrd was at his base camp, Little America, waiting for a break in the weather. His elaborately planned flight over the South Pole was still on ice. The newsreels had come into their own. Now, in living sound, patrons could keep abreast of the important events of the day.
The biggest news of the day is not the naval agreement, not even prohibition, but the return of the natural waistline.
Dorothy Livermore was a typical flapper. She has to embody the 20s. She would do almost anything on an impulse. She had some priceless pieces of 18th century furniture. But the house had settled, and the floors were not level. But Mrs. Livermore didn't like to spend money that didn't show. So instead of having the hoists put underneath, she simply solved the problem by having the legs of the furniture cut off to fit the sloping floors so that the tops of all the furniture were level. But of course, the legs were on different angles. And this was her typical solution. As long as the tops were level, everything was fine.
Everything was not fine that spring with the American economy. It was showing ominous signs of trouble.